Hello, and welcome to PSYWAR, a weekly podcast of the 8th Psychological Operations Group, Airborne, where we give people an inside look at the Psychological Operations Regiment. Welcome back to PSYWAR. I'm your host, Master Sergeant Mike Dean. With me back again today is Sergeant First Class Brian Klein. Welcome back, Brian.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Yep, appreciate you coming out, co-hosting with me. This week we're talking a little bit about some of our myths, some of the common things that come up when we're talking to people about PSYOP and what they think PSYOP is or does. So common misconceptions. So we're going to do a little bit of Mythbusters. Also with me today is Chris. I'm currently serving PSYOP NCO, so again, thanks for coming out, Chris. Appreciate you chatting with us.
It's good to be here, guys. Thanks.
Got a little bit of experience here, a little bit of an outsider's perspective, because you're not a former 37. Most of the people we have on here are 37s, are PSYOPers. So it's going to be interesting to see kind of what you think and have heard from your perspectives, and then also from your background before you came here, and then even from some of your peers, and then what I've gotten from my peers. So really. To kind of kick it off, the first thing I want to start it with, and I think this is a funny one. We hear a lot that PSYOP soldiers are these couch potato, out of shape, just video game nerds or computer nerds. Like, what do you guys say to that? And I want to start with you, Brian, just up front. Like, from an outsider's perspective, what do you think in that?
So yeah, I've definitely heard that PSYOP guys are the out-of-shape computer nerds. You get this picture of the junior SF guys, the guys that couldn't make it in SF or didn't make it in SF, and now they kick down to the PSYOPs because they are smart and they almost made it to SF, but they're just not quite good enough. Is that even possibly true?
So honestly, I didn't actually know. Like when I was originally thinking about going soft, right? I had first heard about PSYOP. It did strike me as a more like intellectual, like cerebral based type of job. When they started talking about selection, I didn't think it was going to be anywhere near like, SF selection. I thought it was going to be, okay, it's probably just going to be like an interview. And I heard a little bit about like maybe writing papers. I'm like, okay, cool. I'm all about that. Doesn't seem too hard. And then selection happens, and it was a lot more physical than I thought. Mm-hmm. And once you're actually in the regiment, one of the things that you realize is that you are expected to maintain a certain level of fitness, right? Because depending on whether you're like tactical or regional, I come from regional, so there's not going to be too many times where we're going to be embedded with like ODAs or other soft elements. But once in a while, you will find yourself there, and there is going to be that expectation, right? So. Are there out-of-shape PSYOPers? I may have seen one or two, but for the most part, I'm not going to say that we're going to be able to go out there and like crush any like physical records anytime soon. But we do have a lot of really like in shape guys, and for the most part, I've seen that there's enough maturity in the regiment that people are like able to sustain their own fitness levels anyway. So, my take on it, I would stamp that as that's a myth. So, I don't know. I know what you've seen.
The way I've been around for a while, I'm the old guy, right? And I've seen, and it's no different Army. You're going to have that guy or gal that, for whatever reason, is out of shape, whatever. That's not the standard here. Absolutely not the standard. And if you fail to meet the standard, you'll be put on notice and be expected to meet that standard. In terms of the out of shape piece, the nerd piece. I kind of agree with it. So this one, I really feel like this is a 50-50, and I say that because you mentioned it, like it's very cerebral based, and having been an instructor and been around this thing for a while, I get a lot of people. What do you guys do? Well, first we do a lot of analytical processes to understand, our population set that we're looking at, and so that is kind of the nerd piece that I would call it, and then. Once you get down into it and start figuring out all the other widgets and how you're going to influence, all the fun stuff comes. All the different ways that we manipulate information. So, I'll say it's like 50-50. Halfway true false because.
Well, that's kind of the thing that the regiment is looking for, right? We want the guys that are cerebral, the guys that are nerds that get into those little details.
Yeah.
The guys that like to program and look into analytics and really dig deep into those little things that you have to kind of be a nerd to get into.
Right. No, and I mean, it goes like when you start talking about like some of the cyber stuff. Earlier today we were talking about coding and understanding websites and web pages, social media. That's a big thing right now. If you understand that, you already have a good grasp. You're already light years ahead, and then being able to take what we do and apply it to those information environments. That's a huge win for us. So, coming into the MOS, you better be prepared to be physically fit, but at the same time, that physical part translates over to your brain as well, and you better be able to think abstractly and solve crazy weird problems, with the assets that you're given. So, like I said, I think it's a 50-50 kind of.
Just to add on to that too, it was kind of one of the more striking moments when I came back from deployment earlier this year. We had a new guy in my detachment who had just come from a tactical battalion, and he basically, after a few weeks of observation, he basically told us, like, man, you guys talk about really different things here. And I was like, what do you mean? It's like, is it where I came from? We talked about guns and all that stuff. It's almost like infantry type stuff, right? Here is like, you guys are here talking about like politics and stocks and markets and programming, right? And I was like, yeah, this is the environment that we have here. So I absolutely agree. I'm actually leaning more towards, most of us are probably nerds, but I've never been to a tactical battalion, so I wouldn't know what the persona there generally is. But
It's weird because, like I said, I've been there, I've been around a while. You get the guys that still talk about the guns and all the the standard Army stuff, and then really the soft, when you talk about the stereotypical soft soldier. But then all of a sudden, the conversation will take a wild left turn, and we're talking about politics, or we're talking about the latest, greatest social media application, or something like that. So, like I said, I think it's a 50-50. Half of it's kind of busted, the other half is definitely there's some truth to it. So, I want to move into the next topic, and we hear this a lot, and I think over the last year or so, it's kind of come to light for some folks. For me, I've always known this. If you look at our history. You'll realize it, but the kind of the myth was or is psychological warfare or psychological operations as we know it today came after the onset of special operations. And so, what do you guys have you heard or think about that? I guess from your backgrounds.
Yeah, I really don't know anything, so it would be kind of intuitive to think that special operations and PSYOPs kind of came up together, that it was just a subset of the special operations. But we were talking earlier before we started recording that it was actually not true, that PSYOPs is a separate thing.
Well, it's kind of weird because it's one of those things where if you look at the concept of psychological operations and psychological warfare, that's existed for thousands of years, right? You read into these ancient classic like military texts like Sun Tzu and his Art of War, right? He absolutely talks about psychological operations. He may not use those specific words, but he absolutely, looks at engaging, an enemy in a completely different level. He talks about like winning a battle without actually fighting the battle. That's psychological. As far as American psychological operations is concerned, now, historically speaking, the Office of Psychological Warfare existed before our modern day take on special operations, right? Yeah. So, as far as like chronological existence goes, I'm just gonna go ahead and put it out there. We came first, I believe, as far as like being an official unit. Yep. Now, over the course of the last 100 years of existence of like PSYOP elements, it's kind of been like on and off a lot. There's been times where we've been decommissioned and then recommissioned, and like some units were decommissioned, and then they like 50 years later they got recommissioned. It's been one of those things where the Army has basically like turned us on and off depending on whether they needed us for specific campaigns. Like what our current look is, I think that's still pretty new, right? Within maybe the last 34 years. So.
Right. So, again, to kind of rewind, World War I was really the onset of official psychological operations for the U.S. military, United States Army. On and off, I don't think there was as big a gap as you were mentioning. Between like World War II and Korea, there was a small gap where they had kind of downsized the force, but there's always been a PSYOP presence in the military. Again, that need grew and shrank based off the campaigns over time. But the event that you're speaking of was in the 80s, Desert One. There was for Iran, the operation there, where they had a huge just debacle. Like there was a lot of people that crashed, helicopters that crashed. It was really the first time that the Department of Defense said, look, we need to really figure out how we're utilizing our special operations forces. And they brought everybody together. So that event at Desert One really was the spark that lit SOF as a organization, US SOCOM, and everything underneath of it. And psychological operations was specifically designated one of the special operations MOSs by congressional mandate. So you had civil affairs, psychological operations, and special forces. And then, as you know, we've had some of our other brethren. You have the Special Operations Aviation Regiment. You also have our Ranger Regiment that fall within that. But from the onset of things that were there first, psychological operations officially was the first thing, which actually brings me to my next topic, and it's it gets because I've had some good conversations with the Rangers, and they do have an awesome lineage that goes way back. But as an official unit, PSYOP was an official designated unit before any of the other SOF.
Right. Oh man, that's
units.
gonna mess. Yeah, you're probably gonna get some angry comments.
I plan on it, and I love it because I will always defer to General Baudet's speech last year at our PSYOP Q course graduation. He said it. You guys are the true originals because PSYOP came before any of the other special operations forces. Which again, to my next point, you hear and it's a part of their motto, I believe, 10th Special Forces Group. They're the true originals. So kind of the same thing. SF was really born in Korea and Vietnam. They do tie lineage back to the OSS just like we do, and some of the stuff that we did together in the early stages of World War I and World War II. But again, when you talk about who's the original Special Operations Regiment, it is psychological operations, and a lot of people don't realize that as the capacity grew, I mean, when you look at the John F. Kennedy Special Warfare Center and School, it originally started as the Psychological Warfare Center and School. And then it would later change its name to Warfare Center and School because it encompassed all of the special warfare activities of the United States Army. So hands down, psychological operations is the original, and to quote General Baudet, the USASOC commander, we are the true originals.
Someone out there is going to be angry at you saying that.
I plan on it. I plan on it.
The Rangers, Rangers lead the way,
and they do, and they have their purpose, and they do what they do really well. I have tons of friends, former soldiers that have all been there or were there, grew up as leaders. And yes, they do what they do, and they do it well, and it's not a knock against them. But at the end of the day, PSYOP was there first as an official unit and regiment. So,
well, that kind of leads into the one I'd like to talk about is that all we do as a regiment is loudspeakers and leaflets.
Ooh.
So I know you guys have heard that, and when I got here, that's exactly what I was told. Was you're gonna do a lot of leaflets, you're gonna build a lot of pamphlets. Let's talk about that for a minute. Is that really the truth?
Do we do them? Yes, absolutely. And it goes back to the nerd stuff we talked about at the beginning, right?
Sure.
So when you're doing all the analysis to figure out how you're going to change a behavior in a country or support a foreign partner, you have to understand how they communicate. And part of that may be a leaflet. It may be a loudspeaker. But when you are wholly looking at that audience, it could also be a website. It could also be a text message. Right. It could run the gamut. And I've heard it from people like, oh, you're just going to ride on a truck, you're going to be attached to the ODA, and you're just going to be the speaker monkey. Maybe. It really depends. And I had, it was a common question when I was in the schoolhouse as an instructor. What else are we able to do? Well, it's up to you guys.
Exactly. That's
I'm
creativity of the individual.
Yeah, so. Like for me, I'm in a leadership role. I'm giving advice, but I'm taking it from the ground. Like, hey, what do you see? You're the guy building the picture. So, what do you want to use? What makes sense? how susceptible is that audience to receiving a leaflet or loudspeaker? Does that make sense?
So I think the biggest reason why this is one of like the stereotypes that really sticks is let's be honest, right? Leaflets and loudspeakers are probably the most like visible things that most soldiers will ever interact with when it comes to interacting with PSYOP, right? Because you can see it, right? You'll see like them loading up the pallets for leaflets and onto the bird and all that stuff. You'll see them rolling out in their Humvees with loudspeakers and stuff. When we engage things on social media and all these other stuff, or like on even let's say radio or telephones, like it's not like soldiers in Iraq or Afghanistan are actually like tuning into our radio broadcasts, right? So they don't see it. It's out of sight, out of mind. So when the only associations they make is like with the stuff that they do see. And I think that's one of the main reasons why, this stereotype really sticks. Going back to when I was still in the 82nd as infantryman and I was starting to socialize the fact that I wanted to go to PSYOP, there was a squad leader in one of the other platoons who sat me down very seriously. He said, you know what, just so you know, you're just going to be doing leaflets and loudspeakers for the rest of your career. Is that something you want to do? And me having come back from like a SOAR brief, I was thinking in the back of my head, I was like, no, that's not the only thing that we do in that job. Obviously I was still an E4 at the time, so I didn't exactly want to like try to correct like an E7, but at the same time I could see why, like when you're in these big campaigns and this is all you see, it's very easy to miss out on the fact that guys in the smaller teams who are out there in the countries by themselves, like in my last deployment, right? All the platforms that we used, all of the methods that we basically utilize in order to push out our messaging, those are things that you usually do not visually see or hear, right? As a as a normal conventional American soldier. And so
So from the outside looking in, it looks like it's almost something that the regiment does to itself. Because the things that they like to put on social media, the pictures that we like to share, is all the stuff like pamphlets and loudspeakers and airdrops. Right. One of the social media platforms I follow is one of the regimental pages, and on their splash page is a UH-60 dropping pamphlets. It's that cool guy look, but it's not the only thing you guys do. I think it was you that told me this. You engage by high tech, low tech, or no tech means, right?
Yep. So whichever version that is, we use it when we need it, and if we don't need it, we don't use it. And it's all about the analysis up front, that big brain nerd stuff that we do at the front end of any operation. And it really it depends on the phase of war, because going down to the no tech, that's what we're doing right now. So you got to be able to span that, the communication network from the no tech, that's interpersonal conversation, low tech, little leaflet drop, or high tech, cyber, like
or
a text
YouTube,
message, a YouTube video,
yeah.
whatever method that your audience receives information, that's what you want to use. And so at the end of the day, it is not the only thing we do. And I can tell you right now, the forefront of what we're doing in terms of warfare, information warfare, it is in the high-tech realm. And so I think while we'll still have those other means available, I think the foreseeable future is going to be focused on the high-tech ability. So it's a good time to be in the PSYOP regiment, looking at the way, the tool sets that we're gaining and the ability to move forward in the 21st century. It's a really exciting time to be here. So one of our skill sets that we have as PSYOPers, everybody knows when you come through SWIC, you're going to get a language if you don't already have one. And sometimes you get advanced training on your language if you already have one, or you might get another language. But all that said, there's a thing called DLI, or Defense Language Institute. It's out in Monterey, California. There are a lot of soldiers, different MOSs that go to this, and one of the common misperceptions is that as a PSYOPer, you can't go there. So I'm wondering, I know you're kind of new to the regiment, and you're not a 37, so like what is your perception on it?
Yeah, so I didn't know there was any other language training other than DLI. So I just assumed that you guys went from Fort Bragg to Monterey, and that's where you learned your language. So is that not the case?
No. So you when you come through the PSYOP qualification course, a part of that course is 6 months of language training at SWIC. It is a subset of DLI, so it's managed and has oversight by DLI, but it is here at Fort Bragg, so soldiers aren't PCSing back and forth, and it is so it's 6 months. It's a little bit shorter time frame than you would typically do at DLI, but the training is actually is as good as what you would receive at DLI. So
it's a lot more stressful though, because for some of those a higher tier languages, usually if you learn it in DLI, you'd get like 18 to 24 months, right? For let's say like maybe like Chinese or Arabic or Korean, right? But here, it's all the same. Whether you're learning like Spanish or like French, these European languages that are more
common.
More common, or like have a closer relation to like the English language. Well, now you're talking about like taking these East Asian languages, and you're all going to learn it all in the same time frame, and you're all expected to pass the oral proficiency interview at the same level, right? So definitely, if more PSYOPers were given the opportunity to go to DLI, I know one or two that actually have gone, and I don't know if they did it as PSYOPers though. I think at least one of them was already a cryptolinguist before he came in, so he came from there. But I don't know if you know anyone in the regiment that has actually gone as a PSYOPer.
I do. I actually had a soldier that went and came back. I will say, if it's something that somebody wants to do, talk with your leadership. I mean, it's absolutely feasible and possible to go do it. At the end of the day, he came back speaking his language at a very, very advanced level.
So he went to go study his language even more.
Yes.
Right.
It wasn't like a new language.
No.
See, that's one of the things that's really intimidating about working with PSYOPers, is everyone I talk to in the regiment has at least 2 languages, and then you meet guys that have 3 or 4 languages, and I'm speaking 1 language, and I'm not speaking it very well. So that's intimidating. That's a scary thing when you go up to these guys.
Yeah.
And I think that might be something that keeps people from joining the regiment, is they're afraid that learning a second language is going to be hard.
Well, anything hard is worth doing, I always say.
Right.
And if you're expecting it to be easier or to be an easy path, this may not be the right path for you, for somebody that's looking into this. However, that being said, don't be intimidated by it. Like, take the step, go do it. Like, the tools are there to prepare you appropriately.
Right.
And I've on the flip side of that, I've had soldiers that got a third language at DLI. They went and they were like a Spanish speaker or something like that, and they went and got Arabic or Mandarin Chinese, something like that. Came back, so now they're coming back and they're increasing their capability for the regiment. Again, it's not, you don't see a lot of people that do it. However, there are people that do it on the regular, and they bring a really, really unique skill set back. You know, because I think for you're a native speaker of a couple languages already. But then you got the opportunity to go through a different language. So now you're what, trilingual, quadrilingual?
Trilingual.
However you say that.
And the good thing about that is, like, one of the things that I like to emphasize when it comes to language learning is, especially for us in the regional side of PSYOP, there's got to be that point of communication with your local partners, even if it's just knowing enough to get to build that rapport, right? We're not asking that you're going to be like a super expert in that language within 6 months, but if you know enough to at least get that conversation going with your local partners, that's actually a huge icebreaker when you're there. Because we work so much in the human domain, being able to just overcome that initial obstacle when you're trying to build these relationships with like these foreign indigenous personnel is a huge operational advantage, right? So again, I understand it can be pretty intimidating. I was already a native speaker of like one language, and I already knew English, so coming in and learning another language, it was very intimidating for me as well, right? So, but don't let that scare you, because one of the things that you're going to find out is when you're going through these classes, the teachers or language instructors, you're not the first student they've had, right? They've been doing this for a very long time. They know exactly, they have it down to a science, right? It's except for a few exceptions, it's actually fairly rare for people to go through our language training and not pass, right? And even if you don't worry, you'll be given multiple a couple more chances to do it, because everybody knows that it is actually a pretty difficult endeavor to do.
Well, since we're on the topic, since I joined the regiment, there's been a real big push through emails and whatnot about the different types of language training you guys get. Do you want to talk about a little bit about that? I mean, if DLI is a rare opportunity, it's still on the table, but let's talk about the other language trainings you guys get.
So some of that stuff is maintenance for your language. So you come out of SWIC or maybe DLI, and you've got a language that you've been built up, and there's different levels. You have your basic, intermediate, advanced levels, and where we want our soldiers is to be at the intermediate level, and so once you hit the regiment, there are opportunities to maintain mostly. Some soldiers do improve. A lot of the improvement comes over your time, like you said. When you're engaging your partner force. Or wherever you're at in the world, and so when you're back here at Fort Bragg, there's a couple options. We get access to resources online. That's a big one. There's a couple different training platforms online where you can go log in and you can just chat with an instructor. Just if you're on a Saturday night and you're bored and got nothing to do, you can go on there and chat with an instructor for an hour or two and work on your language skills. But we also have dedicated class time, both online and or in class. Right now, everything's online because of the COVID restrictions. But that being said, historically speaking, you have the online or in class portion where you sit for 3 to 4 weeks, one-on-one, to really brush the cobwebs off and maybe get a little bit of advanced training there. And you're in a small setting. If I remember right, at SWIC, our class sizes were like 10 to 12, and they may have changed it. It's been a while for me.
Right.
But once you get to the regiment, you're not. It's small groups, smaller. So you're talking about 6 people sitting in a classroom with an instructor for 6 to 8 hours a day. Like that's a huge asset in terms of being able to help yourself either maintain or grow within a language, and that's offered to all of our 37s to help maintain that. The one that I have yet to take advantage of, that I've heard plenty about, is
Yes.
exactly that, live immersion training. I mean, you want to talk about that?
So actually, I was supposed to go to do live immersion training earlier this year, and literally 2 days before I was going to fly out, like the whole lockdown came into play. So I just missed it. I'm going to try again next year. Hopefully, I'll be able to do it. But basically, what live immersion training is that after you've already done your like yearly 30 days of language training, if you pass a qualifying test, you will be allowed to go to a country that where they actually speak that as a native language for another month and just live with the locals, practice your language, and you're going to be working with like local universities in not just learning the language, but also being immersed in the culture, right? So talk about some really cool language training opportunities. That is like the pinnacle of language training for us. So, and this is something that's open to, all PSYOPers. This is not something that's like, you don't really have to compete for it or all that stuff, but you do have to be able to maintain a certain standard, but it's an open option for all of us. So.
Yeah, something else that I just remembered, as you mentioned universities. I don't know if it's USSOCOM or USASOC has a partnership. There's a university, and I don't want to misspeak on it, but there's a university up in New England they have a partnership with where you can actually go for 6 weeks and sit in an academic environment for 6 weeks with whatever your language is. So, I know the whole topic, was, and I think it's busted at this point. That DLI, you can go to DLI, but that's not the end all be all. You've got all these other avenues that you can go to help grow, improve, and maintain your language. So there's plenty of opportunity out there. The trick is fitting it into your schedule, depending on what your rotations for deployments and stuff like that. So it's absolutely something that you can take advantage of. Next big thing, I think that this one makes me laugh, and I get it a lot. And I know you've only been in the MOS a few years, but I get this. Are you guys a part of Intel?
Well, I mean, it makes sense, right? Who else in the Army speaks languages and goes to all these secret squirrel things and like goes behind the closed doors and that does kind of make sense.
To a point, but then by that measure, everybody that's in special operations is intel.
Right.
I'm sure the intel guys would be happy to hear that.
Which, you know, and it's funny because you laugh. I get it a lot, especially from my, you know, friends and family.
Mm-hmm.
You know, your special operations, you do intelligence. No, that's not what I do.
Not at all.
And so, and I will say, it's kind of a small plug to the intel community. The guys that do come over from intel, we talk about the nerds. Again, that's going to come up a lot. A lot of the guys that come over from intel, they already understand the nerd part of it.
Oh yeah,
and so they get over
Intel.
here,
Pretty good fit.
and they do fit really well here. So, you know, hands down, do we understand intelligence? Every function in the Army understands intelligence and how to use it, and understand what to gather from the intelligence folks that matters to your MOS, you know, to your career field. But at the end of the day, that's not our function at all. It's about, you know, changing behaviors. So, which. Go ahead.
No,
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
No. It leads to the next thing because
Well,
again,
just on that part, right? So the reason why I laughed earlier was because that was actually a question that was asked to me by a foreign officer when I was deployed downrange. He asked us, like, "Who are you guys?" We're like, "Well, we're PSYOP," and they're like, "Are you intel?" I'm like, "What? No, I literally just told you what we are." And it's like we do psychological operations. And he's like, "So do you also do intel?" And I'm like,
So
"No, we
intel.
don't." Yeah.
So what you telling me is your
This is
intel.
your intel. And I'm like, okay, well, let me break it down. You know, basically the explanation I gave him is like, look, here's the difference between like psychological operations and intelligence, right? So those guys, they go out and collect all these data points, and hopefully you'll be able to find some insight that you can action in terms of, you know, whatever other elements we have in the military. For us, we use intel for a lot of our analysis, but then our action is to affect a change in behavior. And that's where it's very different for us, right? It's like when we're doing our research, when we're doing our analysis, because we're looking to start maybe some kind of you know, PSYOP campaign or whatever. Whatever intel has, that's part of the large pool of information that we gather from. Right? But for the most part, we don't go out. Like, I don't even think we're allowed to just go out and be like, yo, so we are looking specifically for this, right? That, you know, that kind of intel gathering stuff. No, we don't do that, right? Now, if for some reason, just, you know, out of circumstance, we're, you know, out and about, and something comes to our attention, or we notice or observe something, well, obviously, like, you know, that might be something that we want to note down.
Just like any other soldier, you're going to report interesting information to the right people.
Right, but we don't go straight out and be like, yo, I need you to pull this information from this guy. No, that is not what we do.
not us. You know, we have really great relationships with our intel folks because those guys do what they do and they do it well, and they provide us with what we need in order for us to affect said change that you mentioned earlier.
Absolutely.
So this brings me to the next one. This is again, for me, is laughable to a point. PSYOP is a subset of the CIA, Central Intelligence Agency.
Oh no, I've heard this one. I've heard that PSYOPs is basically CIA light, and that, or the other one I've heard is Army CIA. Right? They think you guys are spies.
Oh boy.
I just think it's funny because I understand what the Army is and what we do as an Army. But so CIA is a completely separate organization. They have different techniques and tactics. I just, how do you argue that no, that's not what PSYOP is, but this is what PSYOP is? And then they're like, yeah, CIA. Or the same thing with the intel. Intel.
I mean, it's same, but they're, you know, they are a function of, you know, a separate function of the government, and they have their purposes, and, you know, we are not that. We don't at all. We don't reach out to that. Now, I will say that doesn't mean we don't work with other agencies across the U.S. government, but at the end of the day, we're not doing super secret sitting behind trying to do, you know, the James Bond or the
Jason Bourne.
Jason Bourne. More relevant to today's.
Like, honestly, I wish, right? It would be so cool to be able to have those skill sets. But at the end of the day, we've got our own function, you know, and we try to be good at that function, because when that function works really well, it enacts a tremendous amount of change that is favorable to our country, and that's what we're working towards.
So, do you guys think that this misconception about what PSYOP is because they don't really understand what PSYOP is? You've already said it a few times.
I think that's part of it, and that's a big reason why we started this podcast, was to try and educate people not just on how to get to the regiment, but like what we really do. And we've had a lot of good episodes. We've had a lot of folks on that have talked about their backgrounds. So hopefully it starts to clear that up. That's why we wanted to really address some of these things, because it comes up a lot in conversation. And, now that this, will be out there, on social media, hopefully those folks that are like, well, what do you mean? Well, Mythbusters, let me go look at what PSYOP's really about. Because just there's so many misconceptions about what we are and what we do that it just creates confusion for everybody, not just the people that are thinking about coming to PSYOP, but even the leaders, like senior leaders. Well, again, to go back to the leaflets and loudspeakers. Well, I don't need leaflets and loudspeakers, so I don't need you.
Oh, yeah.
Hold on. Wait a minute.
Yeah.
That's not the only thing I do.
Right.
Let me run you through the gamut. And then when they, you get the light bulb goes off, and then they start to understand where you fit into the bigger picture. So
And I think that's a problem for a lot of small MOSs. If the leadership doesn't understand what you do, they don't know where to put you or how to use you. And yeah, that's a problem for PSYOPs. Okay. Kind of leads into the next one, where it's PSYOPs is a branch of the medical field. Again, a misconception about
I don't know
what you
where that
are.
came from, to be honest.
I have to assume that's from the psychology,
Probably, right?
sociology.
yeah, so I've actually had this one asked
Like
to
a
me
therapy thing?
Yeah, I
several
guess
times.
so.
Well, you people hear psychological.
Okay.
Psychological operations. So you must be a
can see that.
psychologist, right? You're a psychologist.
I've heard that question before. Like, are you a psychologist?
And so, well,
No.
but when you look at the way the medical field is broken down, you have your psychologists
Psychiatry.
that do what they do, and they have a purpose. It's not what we do. It's not what we are. Now, I will say, do we understand and use certain psychology tactics, techniques, and procedures? Yes, because what do psychologists do? What do psychiatrists do? They want to understand how people think. Well, we're the same way, but at the end of the day, we're trying to affect a behavior change, and so we may use those methods to understand an audience, but we are not psychologists. We are not trained. We don't have that ability. That is not us. We are not a function of the medical field at all.
So you basically tell people, don't tell me your problems. I can't help
Right,
you.
exactly.
You need to talk to a real professional.
Well,
we can't sit you down on a sofa and like talk about your life issues.
Yeah.
That's not us.
I mean, I will any day if a soldier needs to talk. By any means, I will sit down and talk with them. But I am not a qualified, trained professional to sit and sit on the, like you said, on the brown couch and
Right.
and
Just tell me all your problems, and then I'm there with my notepad. I hope that part's really clear, because I know that word is there, and it's a word that's tied to a lot of different like notions. But no, we are not at all in like the therapy side of like psychology.
So you're not Intel, you're not CIA, you're not medical. What are PSYOPs? Well, I mean, let's break it down to what is PSYOPs.
well,
When
first,
I ask you that, a lot of people don't give me a great answer. But
right. Well, first, it's PSYOP. So I'm going to continue on that because I know you're.
that's not the first
I know-
time that's happened.
I know,
Okay.
I know you're new to the regiment, but so it's okay. But people, I love this conversation. It creates such a great conversation with people in the regiment, outside the regiment, because you talk about operations. There should be an S, because how do you say ops?
Back me up in the comments.
But somewhere, somebody somehow said, "Hey, PSYOP." There's no S for U.S. American PSYOP. When you start talking about NATO, absolutely has an S. All of our partners, everybody has PSYOPs. So you're not all the way wrong, just wrong when it comes to American PSYOP. However, at the end of the day, what is PSYOP? We, and I'll let you add on to this, but we are in the business of changing behavior. We look at an audience, we figure out how they communicate, and we find a way to change a behavior that's beneficial to the American policymakers. I don't know if you have anything to add on to that.
That pretty much, it's like, if you have to like distill it down to its very core, that's basically like the answer that we like to give. Because when we start, we start going beyond that core definition, now it becomes like individually, individual experience driven, personality driven. Because if you talk to like different PSYOPers, right, we all have a different experience, right? And that just goes to show how broad the field is. The way I will enact a change in my mission set is going to be different from the way, my colleague in, one office away is going to enact a change. And which is why I think a lot of the confusion when you ask somebody is like, what is PSYOP, is that they jump straight to talking about their experiences as opposed to just starting from that baseline definition of, hey, behavioral change that is favorable to the United States, right?
Yep.
And that's like, if we have to break it down to a baseline definition, that would be what I think we could all agree is what we do.
Yeah, I mean, the other problem is people try to jump to the how. Well, I do leaflets, I do loudspeakers, I do text messages, I do social media. Yes, but that's not what you're doing. That's a means to an end.
Right.
I am trying to affect a behavior change at the end of the day that supports my commander and supports the overall U.S. national strategic objectives. And that's very raw, easy definition. That's what it is. All right. So speaking of geeks, nerds, we keep bringing it up, and it fits perfectly, right? We talk about being weird, having social skills. Does that mean that the soldiers that show up here to the regiment are just weirdos and don't have the ability to interact in a social setting? And I know you're an outsider coming in. You've been with the regiment for like 6-8 months, something like that.
Yep.
So I'm curious what you see, and I'm curious what
Right.
being the guy working next to the guys and gals here. What does it look like from your two perspectives?
So yeah, I don't think that's necessarily the case. These guys are in the Army to begin with, and they've already built social skills. And when they come into the regiment, they don't just lose that. They're not the basement geeks, and we are active, physically fit people. And you guys come in over, or we go over to you, and we interact just fine. It's not some weird antisocial group. The regiment is they're soldiers, and when they interact with everyone else, you really can't tell a difference.
I actually find this stereotype a little weird because, communication is like the baseline skill that we have, right? So we, at the very least, should know how to talk to people. Now, I think that covers the whole no social skills thing, but are we weird? Now, let me address this a little bit. Because I feel like for a lot of outside observers, when they listen into our conversations, it might seem like we have and I admit that I'm probably part of the problem here, is like we can have some very eccentric personalities talking about some very, very like far left field conversations, right? And a lot of that is really just, it's part of like us bouncing, ideas off of each other, or I'm not gonna lie, I actually am part of a very like, of a group of people back in my company where it's like, honestly, we're a bunch of goofballs and we like to have fun, right? So some of our conversations are just absolutely wild, right? I think it's part of the overall personality of PSYOP, where when you start to basically when you look at most topics in the world and you look at the different aspects of all of these subjects that we have to cover, right? It can be pretty stressful. So at some point, there's going to be this kind of culture that's going to be built where you're going to be talking about like the most serious topic in the most non-serious way. And I feel like for outside observers, if they can't relate to that stuff we're talking about, it almost makes it look like, we're probably just being antisocial with everyone else. But, believe me, we know how to play with everyone too, right? We'll talk to anyone.
So maybe so I've seen that kind of thing in normal Army units where a bunch of guys who've worked together for a long period of time,
Right.
when the new guy shows up, all of a sudden they clam up because they just got to wait to see who this guy is and how he feels.
Yeah.
Maybe where that stereotype comes in is when the PSYOPer shows up in a group of guys and they're like, who is this guy? And he kind of, I don't have to go to your experience, but you might clam up until you kind of feel them out.
Right, absolutely. I think that's a normal human thing, right?
Yeah, in any new environment, that's a regular reaction, I think.
But then if you look at like the range of topics that they're going to have to be listening to as they're trying to, feel their way through like the social dynamic of a group, it's probably a little broader than your normal Army conversation. And that's probably what makes it a little longer for people to start to, before they start integrating socially with like PSYOPers. But I know most of the PSYOPers I know are friendly people. Like we love to open up to others. We love like meeting new people. because it's such an integral part of the job. There are only very few PSYOPers I know who are more shy than they are, extroverted, right? And then you'll have these guys who are, very, very quiet on the offset, but they're actually, good people, people as well, right?
And I mean, they do have the ability to communicate. So, kind of 2 points. To address the weird part. Yes, there are some quote unquote weird. We have people that are your Trekkies.
Oh yeah.
Your Star Wars nerds.
Oh yeah,
absolutely.
Tons of
plenty
them.
of those.
And when you think about it, and well, even to take it a step further, everybody loves LARPing, right? Right? And you laugh.
Okay.
And you laugh. What is LARPing?
There's live action role play.
Right. What does the Army do every time we go to the field?
That's what LARPing is. Yeah.
Right. Like when we look at our exercises, when we do these interagency training and stuff.
Right.
Oh yeah.
We got role players.
We're LARPing.
Right?
So the Army LARPs all the
in.
time, and people would like to bust on it for these guys that like to, play Medieval Knight. We have people that do that too. Yes, we have some people that do some different things. But at the end of the day, when you come back to it and their ability to engage and communicate, they're able to accomplish the mission. And so I don't care what you do on the side. Go have fun, do what you do. But when it comes to work and you show up, like you got to be able to put your money where your mouth is, figuratively and literally. And I will say, kind of to what you were kind of talking about with the communication skill side of it, doesn't always come natural. And I say that that's where we do a pretty good job, giving a baseline in the schoolhouse, but then once you get out, putting people into the situations through our quote unquote LARPing, our exercises, our pre-mission training, PMT, you're getting put into scenarios to build on your ability to communicate. Because some people, we do get introverts, and I've seen them where they show up. I had a soldier. This dude was the most introverted person I think I've ever worked with. But when we put him in the environment to do the job, a switch flipped. And the dude was able to communicate. It was different. It was almost like he was two different people. It was weird. But when we went back to the team house, he went back to his video games, his door shut, and I wouldn't see him for 3 hours. And it was like, okay, cool. Like, the day's done, you do you. So, yes, we do have people that do unique things and are have different personalities, but I think that's really what makes the regiment so unique, because we have that diversity. We have diversity in different cultures, different races, all these different backgrounds that, when you bring that different personality, it brings a different aspect to the mission set, and you get different perspectives, so you're not just looking at it from one perspective. And so I think, those types of people bring a lot to the regiment.
Just, basically to add to that, honestly, for anybody out there who might be like thinking about the kind of culture that we have here, bring your brand of weird. Like, it's probably going to be accepted here, because you never know when your perspective or your insight is the thing that's going to make us successful downrange, right? I mean, we may joke about like, hey, we've got like Dungeons and Dragons circles here and there, or like dudes who are like bringing in magic cards and stuff. It's like like people who are more inclined towards like maybe jock mentality would be like, what a bunch of nerds, right? But you never know if like creating a card game for a bunch of kids in this like third world country is how you're going to get them to start reporting like terrorists, to like, the United States, things like that, right? It's like, don't underestimate the value of any avenue or any platform that you could be using to enact like, the behavior change that we want, which is why you'll notice that as far as the explorations for all kinds of topics and subjects and stuff, we're all over the place with that, and it's completely acceptable in our culture. So yeah, that's pretty much like what I have to add.
I like
to
what
that.
you said. Bring your weird.
Bring your brand
bring
of
it
weird.
Bring your brand.
Bring it to the regiment.
Yeah,
I like it.
Absolutely. Like, the more the merrier. Gives us different perspectives. So this next one is kind of funny, and we mentioned Star Wars, right? And you were kind of alluding to it earlier, before we started. do we brainwash people or do we do Jedi mind
Jedi,
control?
These are not the droids you're looking for.
These are not exactly.
These are not the soldiers you were looking for.
No
detail for me. Yeah.
Is that a thing in PSYOP?
Whew. So it's not in like. This is gonna have to be a yes or no one for me because no in the sense that I can't just like walk up to somebody and wave my hand and be like, I now have like I control you with my will. However,
okay, you'll get there one day.
Okay, so I guess I'm just a grasshopper in this regard right now. But as far as a lot of the things that we do, right, there are certain types of missions where we do absolutely have to get people to change a particular behavior, both either for our safety or for the benefit of our partner nation forces. Now, as part of our training, we are given a much deeper understanding of the human psyche and human psychology than your average soldier, right? Now, do we use that to our advantage? Absolutely. Do we understand what heuristics are? Do we know, do we know these little brain hacks? Do we know the shortcuts that the human mind takes? And do we take advantage of that? Yes. Are those, would I call those Jedi mind tricks? Not really, because that information is available to everybody. Right. You can literally pick up a book that talks about heuristics, right? Or the way that the brain is wired and all that stuff. So, a lot of the things we do, we base it off of a lot of the same psychological research and body of literature and behavioral sciences that everybody else has access to. Now, how we actually execute that, right? And how we manifest that in a mission, that is up to your creativity. Yep. So it's almost like when you watch a magician, right? An illusionist. Honestly, it's mind-blowing when you watch them doing these things. But if he tells you the trick, is it really as mind-blowing? No. If we tell you how we did most of the stuff we do, you'd probably be like, "That really? That was it?" Right? But it's why we don't tell you that. That doesn't really make it like a Jedi mind trick. It just means we're just not disclosing, the technicalities of it, right?
Right.
So I don't know what your take on that is.
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, a little bit of my comic book nerd coming out. We're not trying to take Bucky Barnes and turn you into the Winter Soldier. Mm-hmm. None of that.
Right. Absolutely.
It's finding those vulnerabilities and taking advantage of those to change a behavior, and using whichever method based off your creativity to get to that. And so, again, to your point, and I like your analogy with the magician. Maybe we want you to look left, and we're really playing with something on the right hand, and vice versa, whatever the case may be. But if you were to break down the mechanics and know the mechanics of the trick, well, then it's like, well, what's the point?
Yeah, that's kind of the
mystery anymore.
That's kind of the whole point of being secret squirrel. I call the regiment secret squirrels all the time, but you don't want to give away the tech, the how the magic trick works,
right? Because
once you do that, everyone's going to start looking at that,
right?
And you know what we do, but you don't need to know how we do it,
right? I don't know if secret squirrel is the right way. I mean, I guess from an outsider that could kind of look like that, but at the end of the day, we use a lot of well-known principles and theories to get to our end state. Talking back when we mentioned the psychology stuff, we use psychology, we use sociology, we use marketing, we use all these things come together to create a behavior change. So at the end of the day, if you're susceptible to that change, to the magic trick, and I say, poof, the coin is gone, well, you're going to believe the coin is gone.
Oh, no, I've seen it work. I've talked to you for 20 minutes, and all of a sudden I'm ready to drop an RSOF packet. And,
hey, let's go.
What just happened? I've been doing this a long time. I can't do that.
Yeah, we'll get you over here.
Join the dark side.
Yep, come over to the dark side. I love it. So you mentioned Secret Squirrel, and this actually kind of touches on a next, I'll say, semi-sensitive point, because you talked about guys that go to selection. Sometimes they go to SF and they don't make the cut there, and they're like, well, what's next? And they come over here. You hear a lot of guys talk about SF dropouts. I hate that. People figure out what they want to do with their career. That's what they want to do. At the end of the day, you hear a lot of guys say, well, you're just trying to be SF, or you're trying to be like SF, or you want to be like SF, Special Forces. For me, and I'll let you answer, and then it'd be good to kind of see your perspective from the outside. No, never. That was never a thing for me, personally. I always wanted to go into PSYOP from the get-go, never even thought about Special Forces. And even, some guys will come into PSYOP and they'll still go to Special Forces to other things. But that was not what I wanted to do. They have a very specific mission set. And, if that's what you want to do, great, go and do that. But our mission is different. It's very pointed, and we'll beat the drum all day. We're trying to change behaviors. And so being able to do and understand that from an intellectual standpoint, that was what was appealing to me. Having come from being an 11 Bravo, yes, you have to be smart and understand battlefield geometry and tactics. But when you start talking about behavioral change, that's a whole nother level of thought process that you have to then, be willing to accept. And that to me was intriguing. And I never ever crossed my mind. Even when I had the opportunity, I could have said, okay, well, I'm done with PSYOP. Let's go try SF. No, that never crossed my mind. And I've never tried to be like that because their mission is not our mission and vice versa. And so, I absolutely will say that's not what the PSYOP regiment is. Are there people that do work with, the Special Forces ODAs and have good relationships and, build skills that are similar? Yes, that exists because we have to have, you'll hear the cross-functional team or multi-domain operations, those terms thrown around. Well, that's where we're collectively coming together to work together to achieve a desired end state. Mm-hmm. So it may be important for me to understand certain things or to be able to do certain things within with a Special Forces team that I may not otherwise be able to do. But that doesn't mean I'm trying to be like them. I'm just trying to be able to work cohesively with them. So I'm curious on your thoughts.
Honestly, I feel like a lot of the, especially with this specific stereotype, I think it was kind of like our fault in general because when we try to project who we are to other people, a lot of the imagery that we use, a lot of the videos, a lot of the pictures are like when we're doing more tactical, related stuff.
Cool guy stuff.
Yeah, cool guy stuff. And I don't know if that's coming out of like an identity crisis within the regiment, or it's just that it's one of the things that we find that we're trying to, use to attract people because our mentality is like, hey, this is stuff that attracts like possible recruits. My personal take on that is like I think it's high time that we start deviating from that because the reality is like the tactical stuff that's literally just one layer out of all these layers of skill sets that we do, and I think we need to start focusing more on those other skill sets, right? Because I've never been in a tactical battalion, but I was infantry before, and I do know that there are huge advantages to being tactically competent, especially as a PSYOPer, right? Yeah. You integrate better with those guys, and that's what we do. But to put a focus on that as like our main job, I think it's almost like false advertising, right? And I'm gonna go ahead and say that because I feel like if you really, really take the time to unfold and expose a lot of the other things that we do, there's plenty of stuff there that are cool. It's just a lot harder to market, right?
Sure.
Because again, like we were talking about it earlier, right? If you were in conventional army, you're like an E4, you're looking for like different career options, right? Which would be more appealing for you, right? A bunch of guys just lined up in a firing line, that kind of thing, or like the guys who are in an office in front of a computer. Now, right, in terms of marketing and branding and stuff, it's pretty easy in general, right? It's like most people want to go do the cool guy stuff, like you said. Which is why I feel like, it is now up to us to, one, articulate the fact that our job actually consists of a whole lot of other things. And secondly, to create to basically project the right kind of culture, right? And I think this is something that this podcast has been trying to do in general. Are we trying to be like SF? I don't. I've never even thought that, right? Because they have a completely different mission. I absolutely respect those guys for their mission, and they're really good at it. I in my last deployment, I only really interacted with one SF guy. He was kind of like. Their ODA was basically fragmented because they had to cover the entire country. So we only interacted with one member of their ODA, but he was very, very good at what he did. At the same time, he was absolutely aware of what we did, and when it came time to ask us for advice on, hey, I need to enact something on a psychological, a social level. What do I need to do?
Right.
You know, so there are lanes here, and if everyone respects their lanes, then the soft units are going to be able to integrate better. I don't think it's fair to judge us on, you know, maybe projecting the more tactical side, because again, as far as at least in the last, you know, 19 years that we've had ongoing campaigns in the Middle East, that was the stuff that appealed to people. So I think, you know, we shouldn't be judged on that as harshly, but I also think that it is about time that us regional guys actually project what we do as well in terms of like branding and marketing sense. So
That's fair. So when I was back, I don't want to tell you how old I am, but back when I was getting the briefs about soft community, you know, they didn't ever sell us that PSYOPs was SF Light, or, you know, the SF rejects got to go to the other two branches, PSYOPs or CA. But they were sold as separate branches, and I never actually made the connection that kind of rumor was ever even a thing, right? If you washed out SF, you washed out and you went back to your unit.
Right.
I think that's the same with the PSYOPs or the civil affairs. But the idea, now see, I'm very familiar with making marketing, right? So I worked for a Signal Command as a public affairs specialist, and I had to make Signal look cool. And there's only so many times you can take a photo of a guy sitting behind a computer and make that look cool.
Right.
So it's really easy to go to a range that we do once every other month or every 3 months and take photos and make that look cool.
Yeah.
Or, but you guys do cool guy stuff too. It's just that's not your main mission. I looked through some of your imagery because that's the thing I'm doing is taking over, and we're doing reaction drills where you actually have a M9 and an M4, and you're switching between the two weapons.
Right.
Regular Army guys don't get to do that, and you're training to do that. So you can't say that you're not doing the tactical cool guy stuff. You're just not doing it to the extent that Special Forces is doing it.
Right.
Right? You got to do it enough that you can keep up with them.
Yep.
But that's not your job. And I
Right.
think that's kind of where that misconception comes, is they see that and they're like, oh, they're doing this. Well, again, it comes down to knowing what is PSYOPs. And like you said, we got to do a better job of explaining that, yeah, we're not those guys. We're not the teams. We're doing different things. We're affecting behavior changes through other methods.
Yep. No, absolutely. So this, I think this will sum it up unless we get down a rabbit hole or something like that. But this is it's probably one of my favorite things to talk about, and I get heckled on this one all the time from my friends, especially back home. Have you guys seen the movie Men Who Stare at Goats?
Oh, yes.
Absolutely.
Oh,
yes.
So the movie is loosely based around psychological operations. And I say loosely because, you know, talking about what happens in that movie, and we've been talking kind of, over the last, hour and a half, however long we've been here, about the how, we talked about the communication networks and communication methods. So have you guys have seen the movie, I'm assuming.
Oh, yeah.
Because you guys, like, what are your thoughts? Like, is that PSYOP? Is that a good representation of PSYOP? Is that what we do?
So
the
our
4th and 8th PSYOP group, even our reservist brothers and sisters in the 2nd, 7th groups. Like, are we sitting outside right now practicing bursting clouds?
So no. If the question is, are you the guys in the movie are like men who stare at goats? That's a hard no, right? I think that was actually it was actually a program under a different.
Wasn't it the CIA doing some weird
program,
stuff?
I think
right?
so.
They were doing like
I think so.
weird like telepathic, psychokinesis type research and stuff.
And I believe some of it was
then-
tied to drug usage.
LSD, yeah.
Yes.
It was the CIA
Yeah.
and LSD, yeah.
So yeah, I don't know that in the history of PSYOP we've ever had a program like that, right? So I'm gonna go ahead and say that I think that's like out of all the myths of PSYOP, that's one that we need to bust right away, right? We don't do that. We don't stare at people and wait for like them to explode or something. We don't have PSYOPers like here at the companies just like lined up with like animals in front of them and trying to like impose their will or something crazy like that. A lot of the things we do are very scientifically based on like social sciences and that kind of thing. What makes me laugh at this a lot is because I don't actually know how that association with PSYOP came to be and why that gained traction, right? So I don't know what you've heard from other people. It's just
it's really only an assumption in that, because we've talked about, behavior change and being able to get people to do things that you want them to do. Kind of goes to the Jedi mind trick stuff.
Right.
So it's very similar. Well, what are they doing that be like, oh, I can, like you said, use your words. I'm going to impose my will on this creature, animal, person, whatever it may be. Or I'm going to go outside and I'm going to manipulate the environment with my mind. No, and I will say no, because you can affect your own environment. You decide what you are going to do to achieve whatever you've set your mind to do. But at the end of the day, if I want to sit here and stare at you intensely to get you to do something, it's probably not going to work, and it's going to make the environment really uncomfortable.
Right. Probably freak me out. I need to leave. But
and so unless that's my desired behavior change, that's probably not going to work.
Right. And I think there was actually a scene there where they walk through an office and they actually mention, like, hey, these are U.S. Army PSYOP. It's been a while since I've seen the movie, but I think that was the only real, moment where they actually acknowledge the psychological operations as a different thing.
Right.
But and it was our only nod there. But at the same time, I don't know if this program still exists. I haven't heard of it. But again, I'm still fairly new to the regiment.
Well, this is all based off some CIA research things that they were doing. And they used Army soldiers to do some of this research stuff, including putting on soldiers on LSD. And I think that's kind of where that association happens, is they think that people see the Army uniform and they just assume that it was the Army. And PSYOP sounds like they're doing stuff like that, so they associate it. But that was all CIA research, and they did some really off-the-wall stuff in the 60s and 70s, and even into the 80s, and even before that, I'm sure. That we just get to make fun and poke at it when it comes out years later. But at the time, it was real research. They wanted to see if LSD or other drugs could actually make super soldiers, and that's where that weird stuff comes from.
Unlock some aspect of your mind that'll put you on a higher plane.
I mean, today
level.
people still believe that we only use 20% of our brain. If only 20% of my brain is functioning, I'm gonna fall on the floor, right? I'm gonna die. But people still believe it. So they had to actually test this stuff out and figure it out. But what we do as a regiment is scientific based, well researched stuff, right? It's nothing experimental. Have you guys used any experimental research to do anything that, not that you could even probably talk about it, but
I mean, nothing that wasn't based in some form of technology.
Right.
Like when you start talking about manipulating, mind control, we're not trying to Bucky Barnes somebody. Determine a winner. So there's not a Manchurian candidate that's sitting waiting. That's not a thing that we do, or at least not to my knowledge. And I've been around this thing for a while. Maybe one day somebody will figure that out and be able to do that, but I don't see that as a thing, at least in my day and age, and probably not in yours either.
Probably not, no. So we're going to go ahead and stamp that one as a myth.
I'm just waiting for the comments and the conspiracy theorists going down below saying,
I'm sure.
You guys are lying, and you're definitely those guys that stare at goats. And you Jedi mind trick us. And, okay, I'm just waiting for it. It's going to be great.
We're tricking you into believing a conspiracy theory about a conspiracy theory. No. So that's it. I mean, as far as the stuff that I've got, have you guys heard anything else? Because we're kind of coming to the end here. So I just want to make sure we've covered kind of the big ones that have we've had some people send them in to us, and from our internal regiment, and then even some from your perspective. Is there anything else that you guys have maybe heard or want to address that we could talk about?
I think this pretty much covers most of the ones that I personally heard, but I think being able to have an opportunity to address them will clarify the the information space for a lot of people who have questions about what PSYOP does. So I think we've covered a good amount. So,
anything else that you've heard or want to bust yourself?
I just think that we need to remember that PSYOP's regiments, there are soldiers, and we're not doing anything super crazy. We're affecting behavior changes using known methods and scientifically based actions, and it's said it before, high tech, low tech, no tech means.
Right.
And we're not secret spies. We're not men who stare at ghosts, and we're not, we're not Jedi. But we still make a difference.
Right.
And we affect big changes and long-term changes. And the idea we need to get to is we do stuff that we can't necessarily talk about all the time, but affect major changes. And we're really making a difference as a regiment.
I couldn't agree more. Well, Chris, thanks for coming out, chatting with us.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Brian, as always, good to have you here. So for everybody out there, this is my last podcast. It's been fun. I've learned a lot. I really enjoy being a part of this team. But as you know, the Army has other plans for me. The Army continues to roll along. They made a song about it. So I look forward to seeing more from you, Brian, and the team moving forward. So good luck with the podcast going forward.
Thank you. We got big shoes to fill, and I look forward to continuing the podcast. And thank you to the audience for continuing to watch and enjoy what we're talking about.
All right. We'll see you next time.